We just got new FNAF lore. Well, new old lore. You see, this is an early version of the Freddy Files, back when Scott wanted it to be a big lore bombshell that solved just about everything in the series. He ended up canceling it and taking the lore in a different direction for FNAF 6, but this is a clear look at what the story was going to be at one point. There's just one small problem. Apparently, it's all fake, and by apparently, I mean according to Scott Cawthon himself. Before we get into the rest of the video, let me do the YouTuber thing really quick. Like and subscribe if you want to. Did the subscribe button light up? And follow my Twitch. It'll be linked in the pinned comment. Now, you might be wondering why you haven't heard about this if it was such a big deal. That's why I'm making this video. You haven't heard of it because it all went down on Twitter, a platform not worth stepping foot into unless you follow Bonkboy, who also has a YouTube channel. My goal with this video is to give you all of the information on the Talbert Files so you can understand why the situation was and continues to be so confusing. The main claim of the Talbert Files is that it is an early version of the Freddy Files when the book was meant to be a drastically different thing. The Freddy Files was the first guidebook for FNAF released in August of 2017, a couple months before Pizzeria Simulator. It gives an overview of every entry in the series while trying to avoid outright confirming any theories. There are red markings throughout the book, and Scott has confirmed that these are the remnants of 3 former protagonists for the book. The first was an investigator in the FNAF universe attempting to solve the mystery. The second was an out-of-universe FNAF fan trying to solve the games. The third was an in-universe blogger pretending to try to solve the mystery when in reality they were trying to mislead the reader. Tom and the others who created the document in question claim that they found this old version of the Freddy Files and that it is a straightforward look into what FNAF 6 was originally going to be. This is supposed to be the in-universe blogger plot, where the blogger is Christopher Ryans Talbert, a man being paid by Fazbear Entertainment to spread confusion on their dark past, hence why it's called the Talbert Files. Here's how this video is going to be laid out. First, I'm going to go over just about everything in the Talbert Files. After I go through the info in the Talbert Files, I'll go over the information and drama surrounding it and the evidence for it being real or fake. I think I also found a real alternate version of the Freddy Files that makes the Talbert Files look really suspicious, and I'm not kidding. First, let's get to Christopher Ryans Talbert, the protagonist of this book. Now let's get one thing out of the way first. Dr. Talbert is a Fazbear Frights character. He made his first appearance in the epilogue story in the 10th book in the series. Dr. Talbert was a scientist who collected and studied remnant. He was friends with Phineas Taggart, the scientist who studied agony through haunted objects and unintentionally created the Stitch Ray. Taggart was the agony expert, and Talbert was the remnant expert. He was also the creator of the heart-shaped pendant Eleanor wears throughout the series, which is made of remnant. He studied remnant to save his sick daughter Renelle Talbert, but he lost her in some way. That's the extent of his character in Fazbear Frights. Christopher Ryans Talbert, the Talbert Files version, is a paranormal investigator. He receives a paycheck from Fazbear Entertainment in the book for $100,000. According to one of Talbert's blog posts, Foxy did the bite of 87. Smear, one of the people adding notes to the file, adds that Talbert goes on an extended vacation to Aruba at one point. That's a fun detail. He lists a profile of the 5 children who went missing on June 26 of 1985. Susie Mosteller, Gabriel Gardner, Fritz Smith Jr., Jeremy Fitzgerald Jr., and, quote, my beloved daughter, Cassidy Tucker. This is another instance of Talbert trying to mislead the reader and in-universe user. Fazbender42 points out that Talbert's records show that he doesn't have any kids. Cassidy is not his daughter. The missing children were never found because the safe room was sealed right after they were murdered, implying William planned for this to cover his tracks. Talbert tries to deny the fact that William had a second son, further showing Fazbear's determination to erase the Bite of 83 from history. Apparently he was part of the team that found Springtrap, and Fazbear Frights was created by Fazbear Entertainment in this version of the lore. At one point he says, they have a place for him, referencing the dialogue, we have a place for him, from the real FNAF 3 trailer. Records from a St. George auction show that Talbert was buying a bunch of Freddy's memorabilia around this time, and the Talbert goons point out that the FNAF 3 Fire newspaper says that any surviving items will be sold at auction. He also uses the phrase, putting the pieces back together to figure out what happened. He describes the Happiest Day minigames as remnant-infested arcade cabinets that actually exist in the FNAF 3 plays. So that's everything we have about Talbert and his discoveries. Now that may have felt a little bit disorganized, and it's because he's an outsider to these events, so we just get random tidbits of information of things he found out. But the other characters feel a lot more cohesive and give actual character and lore revelations to existing characters and plot lines. Now let's get to Cassidy Tucker, not Talbert. Cassidy Tucker is the daughter of Emmett Tucker, the man who built the Mediocre Melodies. Her favorite color was green, and she says he made Happy Frog just for her. She's associated with a Happiest Day drawing and a pitch black version of Freddie and Bonnie holding hands with her, with text above it saying, "You are not one of them," which seems to mirror one of Nightmare Fredbear's lines from Ultimate Custom Night.
We know who our friends are, and you are not one of them.
There is a child's drawing of the puppet in a bubble with "me" written underneath that, and this is Cassidy. This is the only illustration within the book that the Talbert goons have provided a screenshot of. In the screenshot, "me" is written above the bubble, and the puppet looks more like a little girl wearing puppet-themed clothing. It's also important to mention that Cassidy is never described, which is kind of suspicious. We never get a description of her hair color, eye color, or anything else like that. Now you may be a little bit confused because Cassidy isn't usually linked with the puppet or the color green, and she's never been the kid of a Fazbear Entertainment partner. This is because the Talbert Files claims that Cassidy was originally going to play Charlie's role before Scott changed the story to line up more closely with the Silver Eyes. In this version of the lore, Emmett Tucker plays Henry's role, and Cassidy Tucker plays Charlie's role. Cassidy is the only child the Talbert Files focuses on. Since we have a Phone Guy book coming out this September, let's talk about what the Talbert Files tells us about Phone Guy. His name is Stephen Callahan, but the book and the document switch between calling him Stephen and Steve. He's been working with the company since 1983, was interested in robotics, and helped Afton test the Springlock suits, and has a gambling addiction, and was apparently a suspect for the missing children's incident because he could have killed the children to seek insurance money, apparently. Most of this comes from a page listing the MCI suspects, and this is probably a reference to the Phone Guy is Purple Guy theories, especially since it also references the Springlocks, because MatPat used the fact that Phone Guy knew about the Springlocks as proof that he was the murderer back in the day. Talbert says almost the exact same thing later on. How would Stephen have known about the usage of the golden suit? Apparently, Stephen had a fight with Michael in 1983. This is one of the things in the Talbert Files that's just funny. It's labeled as a miscellaneous entry, but it's explained horribly. I think what they meant here was that Talbert is trying to lead people to believe that the only incident in 1983 was a fight between Michael and Phone Guy as a way to cover up the bite of 83. It's vaguely implied that Phone Guy was the main wearer of the original Fredbear suit and was close to Cassidy Tucker, supposedly explaining why Afton put her in the Golden Freddy suit. It implies Golden Freddy was the one to kill Callahan because of their earlier connection in life, which is why we hear the Golden Freddy scream in the Night 4 phone call.
I always wondered what was in all those empty heads back there. You know. Oh no.
There is also a screenshot of a newspaper clipping covering the death of Callahan next to a cutout of the original Help Wanted newspaper. This is the most convincing screenshot we've gotten of this book so far. But once again, it could just be an edited version of the first page of the FNAF 1 section of the real Freddy Files, which has the exact same Help Wanted cutout and the Freddy graphic and text. The only difference is the addition of the Callahan newspaper and the absence of the FNAF 1 intro text. Now let's get to Emmett Tucker, which this is an interesting one. Like I said earlier, Emmett Tucker is the man who built the mediocre melodies for Afton. Keep in mind that this man is basically Henry. As far as his role in the story goes, he's Henry. According to the MCI suspect list, Emmett lashed out at William when his line of animatronics was rejected. We also get a note from Emmett written to Afton from around this time. Dear Will, please just give me a chance. I know my project isn't as high-tech of what you dream. You are sick in the head and I'm tired of you bossing me around. Just pay me and I'll take my money and go far away from this place never to be seen again. My family is already in a low income state and I've taken out enough funds from my savings to dedicate my life for this project just to satisfy you. So I quit. Take what else you want from me left. This is one of the Talbert Files' many cases of character dialogue being painfully awkward to read. Seriously, what kind of sentence is "take what else you want from me left"? Emmett was also put under house arrest for trying to kidnap his daughter, who he did not have custody over due to a divorce. This lines up with Henry in the Silver Eyes trilogy, whose wife divorces him after he can't move on from Charlie's death. The biggest difference in this case is that he can't get over not having custody over Charlie/Cassidy while she's still alive. The document never says this is specifically Cassidy, but it also never mentions him having another child. Afton kills his ex-wife and tries to frame him for the murder. It says she was found dead in the backyard in December of 1983, and that Afton tried to implicate him in the murder. Apparently, this is why he was listed in the Toy Animatronics criminal database. He was evidently going to play Henry's role in FNAF 6, since he had things like How to Light Lighter Fluid Efficiently, and Missing Child Reports Between 1980 and 1999 in Washington County, Utah. Emmett Tucker is also a Fazbear Frights character. The Talbert Files claims Scott reused character names and concepts from this scrapped book for Fazbear Fright stories years later. Emmett Tucker is a character in the story Fine Player 2, who the main character mistakenly believes to be a child murderer. In a page on the suspect for the missing children's incident, Emmett Tucker is listed as a suspect, and the document says he was the suspect charged for the missing children's incident that the FNAF 1 newspaper refers to. This also lines up with the Silver Eyes trilogy, where most people in the town believe Henry was the one who killed the kids due to his instability after Charlie's death. Now let's get to what the Talbert Files says about Michael Afton. There's not a lot about Mike here, but what is here is pretty wild. And Tom randomly mentions that Mike Schmidt is the one having the FNAF 2 dreams. For anyone who doesn't know, the pre-night cutscenes in FNAF 2 are labeled as dreams in the files. He was convicted of manslaughter in 1983, but apparently the incident is unknown. Here's the big bombshell though. Mike was supposed to be the Stitch Wraith. The Stitch Wraith is a Fazbear Frights character possessed by the souls of Jake and Andrew, two children, one of which is one of William's victims and widely theorized to be the vengeful spirit in the games. Yeah, Michael was going to be the one walking around in a trench coat and killing people and collecting stuff. It says he was stitching together plushes and always carried a stitched plush in his hand. He also carried stitched together human remains in trash bags and stuffed them into the plushies. I can't think of why Michael would be doing this, but it connects to probably the coolest thing the Talbert Troop cooked up in this document. The salvage animatronics were originally going to be cryptids in Utah. A child in St. George heard a strange voice in his attic, and his pet rabbit was stolen and mutilated. When the parents found the rabbit, they saw a bear shape retreating into the attic. It was known as the bear in the attic. A group of teens exploring a junkyard found a tall and grotesque clown animatronic with a lobster claw in a pile of trash. It was rumored to have mutilated several people around town. It was called the Clown Scrapyard Cryptid. Parents in St. George reported their children were hearing and speaking to a strange voice in the sewer drains. The voice was described as groaning and unsettling. It was simply called the St. George Cryptid. I'm gonna assume that's Scrap Trap. There were also reports of ghost children being spotted all around St. George during this time, with some of them disappearing into the sewers. Now let's get to the big old Willie A. There's not a lot about William here, but what we get is very interesting. The Talbert Files shows that William was divorced in 1983, but hides the name of William's wife. We get a confirmation of William's age in 1985, at which he is 40 years old, meaning he was born in 1945. Apparently, he was obsessed with Bonnie and diagnosed as schizophrenic because he saw the shadow animatronics, and he had lost a daughter named Abigail to a gas leak. It is pronounced Abigail, I'm pretty sure, even if it's spelled that way. So Elizabeth was originally named Abigail. This would have been really cool if it were true, because then her nickname Abby would have been an anagram for baby. Speaking of baby, there's a note about Circus Baby's Pizza World here, noting that it was open for a year before it closed. Ballora's name was originally Ballerina, and Funtime Freddy didn't exist. They claim that Scott accidentally sent the Ghostwriter team an early version of Sister Location's script, where the establishment was open for a year instead of a day and had the aforementioned character changes. This might be the most unbelievable part of this entire situation. There is simply no way Scott could make a mistake that massive. But by far the most substantial thing we get about William, and maybe the most substantial thing in the entire document, is this journal entry from William Afton. It's actually really well written, and I want to show you everything it says, but that would be boring if I just sat here and read it to you. So I asked the nifty table if he would do a rendition of it for this video, and he did. Crixton was also kind enough to make the visuals for this part, and links to both of their socials will be in the description.
December 1983. For all my mortal life, I have not been able to fully grasp exactly why I do not feel the things that are deemed normal. In fact, all I feel is rage towards others who do not deserve the life that they have been given, not taking advantage of what lies beyond tangibility. Despite the death of my very own son, I feel no sorrow, no regret, no pain. I feel ridicule and the burning fury within me continues like a rolling thunder. But rage will not get me anywhere, not unless I mend it into something else. If there is meaning to life, if there is a purpose to all the hardships and sorrow, it will remain an elusive dream. For some, the mystery of death and the afterlife is frightening and overwhelming, but I have learned to embrace those unknowns. If anything deserves the name God, it is the very laws of nature themselves, the only universal truth, the only higher powers we all must bow down to before our time runs out. Every place he walked and every tear he shed left its effect in reality. Truly, one cannot die if there remains a peace. It's only a part of them that dies. I will replicate this, and I will create something with the power to give the gift of life. I simply just need a volunteer. Perhaps that Tucker girl. She shines too much of a bright smile. She's a container for love that will soon burst. I will repurpose her.
Now that you know everything about the Talbert Files, pretty much, let's go over the events and drama surrounding it. To understand why this thing is so confusing, you need to know who Tom is. He was one of the most reliable FNAF movie leakers and a fairly well-known theorist. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of FNAF and an abundance of passion for the community. Unfortunately, Tom deactivated all of his accounts on April 29th, right as the Talbert Files leaked, which makes it much harder to know exactly what happened. But I found a thread by user Yankee on Twitter that seems to be the definitive sequence of events. It started sometime around early 2023, when Tom found a physical copy of this old version of the Freddy Files. He emailed Scott to let him know this was out there, and Scott responded saying this was real and that this was the original version of FNAF 6's story, and that Tom could do whatever he wanted with it since all of the ideas in it were scrapped. The only evidence of this first email is a screenshot of an edited Discord message, with the user who sent the message cropped out. Tom decided to hide the Talbert Files because he thought it would cause strife in the community. He did share it with a few friends in a Discord server, and one of them wrote a fanfiction inspired by it called Notes from an Investigator. The full fanfiction is linked in the description. Scott had apparently responded in a follow-up email with the idea that they could turn the content in the Talbert Files into a fanfiction to cover it up. I think it's worth mentioning that this shorter email has a ton of grammatical errors, way more than Scott usually makes. After this, the people in this Discord worked together to create the document that is now being circulated, summarizing all of the info in the book. Why you would do this for non-canon information you never plan on releasing is kind of beyond me, especially since the people in the server claim to have seen the book, while the document chooses to describe 90% of the illustrations instead of showing screenshots of them. But anyways, some members of the friend group started leaking things, and Notes from an Investigator, the fanfiction, was released as a cover-up for it, to make the whole thing look like fanfiction. A user named Lake was the biggest advocator of leaking the story, and their account is now deleted, go figure. They posted screenshots of the Discord server and eventually posted screenshots of their DMs with Tom, where he basically confirmed the Talbert Files as real. After this, Tom deactivated his account, and the zip file covering the Talbert Files was released on April 29th. And the people from that Discord friend group came out and said, yes, we've known about this for a year, the Talbert Files are real. The community went absolutely insane over this, especially concerning the William Afton dialogue that hinted towards Shatter Victim, a popular theory, being canon at one point, and giving Game William proper characterization for the first time ever. On May 2nd, Scott responded to a Reddit post discussing one of the emails he supposedly sent to Tom, saying, guys, you gotta stop believing in this stuff. I didn't write this. People immediately started debating whether Scott was talking about the email itself or the Talbert Files. But if the email is fake, the Talbert Files are also fake. Scott would probably remember an email discussion from when a scrapped version of the end of the lore was leaked. He responded with another comment, saying that he had no idea what the Talbert Files was and didn't plan on looking into it, and that if this was real, he would have addressed it with a Reddit post, not by personal email. This clarified nothing for anyone since the Talbert Files is just what fans were calling it. Remember, This is a scrapped version of the Freddy Files. This meant that Scott still might not have known what people were actually talking about and didn't plan on looking into it. This caused the frenzy to escalate until Scott made an actual post, where he once again said he hadn't looked at the Talbert Files. He did say that it could have been something entirely made by Scholastic, since companies regularly attempt to create new lore in order to create a product for FNAF. So the Talbert Files could have been entirely created by Scholastic with next to no involvement from Scott, except for the fact that he didn't write those emails, which he reiterated in his Reddit post, saying, "There are way too many obvious giveaways." Once again, this post did nothing to calm the community down, with the people from Intom's friend group sounding the alarm on Twitter that Scott was a liar and was throwing Intom under the bus. It also didn't help that this was the third statement he had made without even glancing at the thing people were talking about. Now, I'm not saying Scott had an obligation to look into the Talbert Files, and we all know he's a very busy man, but this situation was starting to feel like the FNAF lore. No matter how many things were added to the story, there was always one more loose end. An hour or two later though, Scott made an edit to the post saying he had watched a few YouTube videos that went through the Talbert Files and 100% confirmed that he had never seen anything like it and that it didn't look like anything Scholastic would have written. For most people, this was the end of the matter, but not for the Talbert troop. They kept reiterating that Scott had to be lying. I hope you can see now how this situation makes no sense whatsoever. It seems like it's Scott's word versus Intom. On one side, you have people saying that Intom will never lie about something like this and that it's disgusting to take Scott's word over his when Intom was practically harassed into hiding over this. On the other hand, you have people saying that there is no reason to trust a random person on the internet over Scott Cawthon. Neither of these explanations make any sense, and therefore neither of them should be taken as the true explanation. There's no reason to assume Scott lied, and there's no reason to assume Intom lied. The Talbert goons who claim Scott is lying are making themselves look awful by yelling about how much of a liar Scott is, while also refusing to post screenshots of the book that they claim to have all seen. So this is yet another unsolved FNAF mystery. Unless I just sort of solved it. Here's where that other version of the Freddy Files comes in. Let's take a look at the cover of the Freddy Files. Notice how the tagline of the book is on these two black bars. This is consistent across all updated versions of the Freddy Files. On the Freddy Files cover, the text takes up all of the space in the black bars. In the screenshots of the Talbert Files, as low quality as they are, they definitely seem to be using a different font, and the text leaves an awkward amount of empty space in the black bars. Now let me introduce my evidence that I found from Ender the Dragon 3 on Twitter when he replied a link to it on a Talbert Files post. It's a link to a 6-year-old Reddit post talking about an old cover for the Freddy Files, except it doesn't say under investigation by paranormal investigator Christopher Ryans Talbert. It says notes from gaming journalist W.A. Ralston. And guess what? Everything about the cover, especially the black bars, are exactly the same as the Talbert Files. It's almost as if someone took this cover, changed the text on the black bars with a different font, and added a red bar that said uncorrected proof at the top and called it a day. Here's another thing to think about. The Talbert goons claim that the Talbert Files line up with the third version of the Freddy Files, the one with the online blogger with an alternate agenda. But the first version with the in-universe investigator trying to solve the case of the murders fits just as well. The Talbert Files is a combination of the first and third sections. But this makes no sense because Scott says each version came after the other. It started with the first version, then became the second, then became the third. The character concept from the first version wouldn't have carried over into the third. Scott said the investigator version, the first version, was scrapped because it didn't allow for gameplay strategies. The second was from the perspective of a FNAF theorist and was scrapped because the book wasn't meant to solve everything. The third version was scrapped because he didn't want to create extra characters because that would add more to the lore. The Talbert Files would have added a massive amount of extra lore to the series, would have solved just about everything, and wouldn't have allowed for gameplay strategies. If this is the third version of the Freddy Files, why would it have the problems of the previous two scrapped versions? If the third version of the Freddy Files was originally meant to lay out the plot of FNAF 6, Scott would have said so in this post or the post about the cancelled version of FNAF 6. It would have been too massive of a part of the game's development for him to not mention it. I can't explain why Intom said this book was real, but I can tell you the sloppiness of the document, the sloppiness of Scott's fake emails, the lack of good screenshots, and Scott's statements from the time this would have been written are proof enough of all of this being an elaborate hoax, even if you totally ignore Scott himself saying it's fake. Quick epilogue story on all of this, Intom has recently reactivated all of their accounts, so please don't go harass them about this, but there could be a chance we get more details about what happened going forward. If you want to wash all this nonsense down with something more lighthearted, click the card on screen right now to watch my jokey video about the fake FNAF 2 trailers created by Screen Culture. Shout out to the channel members who got to see this video early: RoboTurbo13, PatGodFan97, Craze for Real, EndoFan21, Admiral, GlitchRats, Knifering, RNAVids, Tyler Feller, and Starred Cosmos.